Thousands of protesters hit the streets in Barcelona to express anger at mass tourism and its impacts on the city. Some protesters even sprayed tourists with water guns as part of the demonstration.
The economy has been growing faster than most of its neighbours recently, and that's in great part due to its tourism industry, which contributes around 13% of GDP growth. But not everyone is happy about the growth of tourism in Spain.
Tourism has long been heralded as a pillar of global economic growth, with its ability to generate wealth, jobs, and cultural exchange. However, the past few years have seen an increasing number of locals rebelling against the very industry that has become a lifeline for their economies. For these communities, the benefits of tourism are now outweighed by its negative consequences, leading to a global reckoning about the sustainability of the industry.
The Diary of Money.
One of the most visible and damaging effects of tourism is the strain it places on the environment. Popular destinations around the world, from Venice to the Galapagos Islands, are now grappling with the effects of over-tourism, where the sheer volume of visitors far exceeds the capacity of local ecosystems and infrastructure.
Venice is now the first and only city in the world to start charging visitors an entrance fee.
Mass tourism contributes to deforestation, water scarcity, and pollution, causing irreversible damage to natural habitats. Coral reefs are bleached from sunscreen chemicals, beaches are littered with trash, and wildlife is displaced or threatened by human encroachment. For instance, in places like Bali and Thailand, once pristine beaches have been overrun by hotels, resorts, and tourists, leading to increased water consumption, waste disposal issues, and destruction of local biodiversity. In response, some communities have begun pushing back. For example, Boracay Island in the Philippines was shut down for several months in 2018 for environmental rehabilitation, after years of unchecked tourism had turned it into what the president called
declared the island a cesspool following years of mismanagement, corruption, over-tourism and environmental degradation.
Such shutdowns are increasingly being seen as a necessary measure to prevent further environmental harm, but they are also a stark indicator of tourism's long-term unsustainability. Gentrification is another major issue that has sparked local resistance. The influx of tourists to popular cities like Barcelona, Venice, and Dubrovnik has transformed once peaceful neighborhoods into overcrowded tourist hubs. The quality of life for locals has been significantly impacted as cities are flooded with visitors year-round, creating noise disturbance, traffic congestion, and rising housing costs. Tourism-focused businesses often drive up prices in local markets, making it difficult for residents to afford basic necessities like housing and food. In some cases, the gentrification fueled by tourism leads to the displacement of local communities, who can no longer afford to live in the cities they grew up in. In Venice, for example, the city's permanent population has been steadily declining due to the overwhelming number of tourists. More than 20 million visitors flock to Venice every year, while the city's population has shrunk to fewer than 55,000 residents.
A lot of properties here are being rented out to tourists. I'm nearly 50 and I'm having to share a flat. A lot of local shops, like your butchers, your bakers, your dressmakers, all the local services have been transformed one by one into souvenir shops, tourist restaurants, fast food places. Nothing seems to be catered for us.
Locals are now outnumbered by tourists, who overrun the city's narrow streets and canals, leaving behind garbage, noise, and damage to historical landmarks. As a result, many Venetians have voiced their discontent, organizing protests and pushing for stricter regulations on tourism. Similarly, in Barcelona, locals have been protesting against the rise of short-term vacation rentals like Airbnb, which have contributed to the housing crisis by driving up rental prices and pushing locals out of the city center. The situation has reached such a boiling point that anti-tourism graffiti and demonstrations are common. Slogans like "Tourists go home" and "Tourism kills the city" have become a rallying cry for frustrated residents, illustrating the deep resentment they feel toward an industry that has overrun their city.
The prices are going so high that now people who work and live here cannot really afford an apartment. You feel like you are in a theme park, that everything is not really for living there.
While tourism can promote cultural exchange, it often leads to the commodification and exploitation of local cultures. In many cases, traditional customs, rituals, and ways of life are reduced to mere performances for tourists, stripping them of their authenticity and meaning. Cultural landmarks are turned into photo opportunities, while indigenous peoples are often marginalized or forced to cater to tourists rather than continuing their traditional practices. One notable example is the Maasai people in Kenya and Tanzania, who have long been featured in tourism campaigns as a symbol of African culture. However, the reality is far less romantic. Many Maasai communities have been displaced from their ancestral lands to make way for luxury safari lodges and wildlife parks, which are primarily geared toward wealthy foreign tourists. The Maasai are often expected to perform dances and rituals for tourists in exchange for small sums of money, reducing their rich cultural heritage to a spectacle for entertainment. In Hawaii, the influx of tourists has also sparked a backlash among native Hawaiians, who feel that their culture is being commodified and their land exploited for profit. Many locals have expressed frustration with the way their sacred sites and traditions are marketed as tourist attractions, with little regard for their cultural significance. This cultural exploitation, combined with the environmental and economic pressures of tourism, has fueled a growing movement among native Hawaiians to reclaim their land and push back against the tourism industry. While tourism can provide jobs and revenue, it often exacerbates economic inequality and creates a dangerous dependency on an unstable industry. Many tourist destinations rely heavily on low-wage labor, with local workers employed in service jobs such as housekeeping, waiting tables, or working in hotels. These jobs are often seasonal and precarious, offering little in the way of job security or upward mobility. Meanwhile, the profits generated by the tourism industry often flow to large corporations or foreign investors, rather than benefiting local communities. In countries like the Maldives, where tourism accounts for a significant portion of the GDP, the benefits of tourism are unevenly distributed. While luxury resorts cater to wealthy tourists, many local residents live in poverty and work long hours in poorly paid jobs. This reliance on tourism also makes these economies vulnerable to global economic fluctuations, natural disasters, and political instability, as was starkly illustrated during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the collapse of global travel brought tourism-dependent economies to their knees. The pandemic highlighted the fragility of an economic model that relies so heavily on tourism. Many workers lost their livelihoods overnight, and the lack of diversification in these economies left them ill-equipped to recover quickly. This has led to renewed calls for a shift away from tourism dependency and toward more sustainable and equitable forms of economic development. While tourism is unlikely to disappear, a shift toward community-driven models of tourism is necessary to prevent further harm to the people who call these destinations home.